critical operation from Ukraine. The sabotage in Zaporizhia could cause a very big problem. The Russian army is completely in trouble with this move. Tens of thousands of Russians are forcibly evacuating the region. With this retreat, Ukraine's ingenious plan worked, but Putin's response was very heavy. In the last days of the Russian-Ukrainian war, the Ukrainian army started to take different steps. The moves in Zaporizhia were an important example. Russia seized this region shortly after the start of the war and continued its stable rule until recently as part of its assimilation and deterrence policies in the region. It started to send Ukrainians to the interior of Russia by forcibly issuing them passports while settling Russians in the evacuated areas. With the confidence of the predominance of civilians in this region, putting out all ammunition depots to this region, but the Ukrainian army's plan in this region completely cornered Putin. The Ukrainians, who were aware of the ammunition Putin had in this region, immediately took action after realizing that the Russian army needed such ammunition on the near front lines. The Ukrainian army contacted the Ukrainians in Zaporizhia. Putin was reluctant to engage in a hot conflict because of the nuclear power plant in this region. The Ukrainian army came up with an ingenious plan to evacuate the Russians in that region and to completely eliminate the need for ammunition nearby. For this, the Ukrainians in the region had to organize a massive sabotage. The Ukrainians in this region began to gather information near the nuclear power plant, posing as Russians when they realized that they needed some nuclear leakage to alarm Russia. They immediately began the operation. The Ukrainians started a mysterious fire in one of the energy storage centers inside the nuclear power plant. This immediately alarmed the scientists at the nuclear power plant, and the Kremlin was notified to evacuate the area for safety reasons. But Putin was adamant about staying in the area. He delayed the evacuation of the area, keeping the people of Zaporizhia in the dark. At the same time, the Ukrainian army launched an operation in the region, leaving the governor in control of the region at a loss as to what to do. He sent a message to the Kremlin again, but the response he received stunned the whole world. The Ukrainian army started to attack near the nuclear power plant. The aim of the small-scale attacks was to create Russians who were afraid of a nuclear explosion and a second Chernobyl. In this area, the Ukrainian army has been quite successful. When the governor became worried about the future of the people in this region, he mobilized all the means at his disposal and began to evacuate the Russians immediately. The Ukrainians in the area were left to their fate, so Ukraine's plan worked exactly right. The Ukrainian army moved towards the ammunition depots they had identified in preparation for the operation before the confusion became clear. Ukrainian soldiers prepared ammunition trucks in nearby location and started to transport all the ammunition in this area to be transferred to their own inventory. But at this very moment, the governor of Zaporizhia received a stern warning from the Kremlin, and the Russian army was ordered to return to its duties to protect both the ammunition depot and the nuclear reactors. The Ukrainian army, learning about this through the radios, made an ingenious move, and thanks to this, the Russian army would suffer its heaviest defeat in Zaporizhia. The Ukrainian army learned through satellite images that a large group of Russian troops were heading towards Zaporizhia in addition to the ammunition it could carry. The Ukrainian army deployed directors to nearby airports in order to provide a reinforcement to this region. This move was recorded as the move that would enable Ukraine to win the war. When the Russian soldiers arrived at the ammunition depot, they found that it had been completely loaded. This caused a lot of anger, especially in the Kremlin, and the order from the top commanders to go on the offensive made things even more complicated. The Ukrainian army waited on the road to the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia. Meanwhile, timer bombs left inside the Russian ammunition depot exploded. The Russian army began to panic. However, the Kremlin's first attack on Ukraine forced the demoralized Russians to attack by force with the necessary intelligence and equipment left behind. The Russian army was not in a position to inflict much damage when the Ukrainian army realized that the Russians were approaching the area. They waited for them to come to the right spot after the Russians entered the area. Ukrainian soldiers put the Russian army in crossfire. With this, some of the already panicked Russian army began to flee back. The Ukrainian army took advantage of this huge advantage and went on the offensive. And they continued their offensive until every single Russian soldier at this point surrendered. While the Russian army was retreating and the Ukrainian side was about to be put in a difficult situation by calling for help in this region, the drones that Ukraine had at the nearby airport were mobilized towards this region, and the Russian troops coming towards the area were intimidated by the bombardment. The Ukrainian army, with the damage it had inflicted and the ammunition it had stockpiled, moved back towards Ukraine. The cost of this event was very heavy for Russia. Not only did Russia's control of Zaporizhia suffer, but also a large amount of ammunition was unintentionally supplied to Ukraine. These complications and troubles brought the Ukrainian army significantly increasing dominance to a different point, but Putin immediately moved to avenge this operation. Putin has moved to use one of the many trump cards at his disposal. Putin, who thought that the Russian army had achieved victory only because of the support given to Ukraine, immediately made a final move and signed a decision that will be discussed all over the world. Russia decided to send some of its nuclear weapons to Belarus in order to utilize Belarus's regional potential. This decision would actually enable Russia to threaten Europe very easily. The main reason for this move was that Putin wanted to deter the countries supporting Ukraine, but this move seriously backfired, and many European countries, realizing that Ukraine was the last line lined up to support it. With Russia making things more complicated with such moves, a very critical move came from Poland. The fighter jets, which are considered to be the biggest need of Ukraine, will be provided by Poland. Poland is one of the countries that has been supporting Ukraine the most since the beginning of the war. The most important reason for this is that Poland will be in second place in a possible successful invasion scenario by Russia. Aware of this, Poland mobilized all the means at its disposal and gave very serious support to Ukraine against Putin, especially its heroic stance on level par 2 has made the whole world support Ukraine with tanks. This step with fighter jets also paved the way for Ukraine to take steps to stop Putin. If the Russian military continues like this, it will face a major crisis, especially if the US decides to provide the F-16s requested by Ukraine. Things will take a very different turn, but Putin's intelligence data has begun to predict that Ukraine will soon have access to Ukrainian fighter jets. These predictions led Putin to make a very critical move. Russia's failure to take adequate security measures, because the war has so far been entirely within Ukraine's borders, has resulted in the deployment of air defense systems on every street in Moscow. This shows that the Kremlin is considering the possibility of Ukraine moving to warranty Russia with airstrikes in the near future. But the Kremlin has a much bigger problem to deal with first. In his recent victory speech, Putin showed the world for the first time that he does not underestimate war. Back-to-back defeats have changed Putin from the man who said he would take Ukraine in 2 weeks to the man who said Russia's future depended on this war. Because of such developments, it is estimated that Putin now prioritizes his own political survival. This shows the whole world that if Putin loses this war, it is only a matter of time before he resigns due to the troublesome experience. With the military operation organized by the Ukrainian army within the borders of Russia, the general appointed by Russian leader Vladimir Putin in Belgorod was captured. Pro-Ukrainian Russian Liberation Army soldiers cleared 3 towns in Belgorod from the occupation forces and captured the Russian general and 22 Russian soldiers. The war between Russia and Ukraine, which has been going on in Ukrainian territory for a long time, is currently going on within the borders of Russia. The Ukrainian army, which entered the territory of Belgorod on Russia's border with Ukraine, organized 3 different operations and pushed back the Russian troops there. The pro-Ukrainian Russian Liberation Army soldiers who organized a large-scale military operation within the borders of Russia with a gigantic strategic plan disgraced Vladimir Putin to the whole world. Pro-Ukrainian soldiers not only captured a Russian territory for the first time with the operation they organized, but also neutralized and captured the Russian general assigned in this region. Pro-Ukrainian soldiers who reapplied the strategy they had previously implemented in the Zaporizhia region infiltrated into Russia by wearing Russian military uniforms. The success of the pro-Ukrainian soldiers who captured 3 Russian regions with the military operations they organized here and captured a large Russian headquarters in the Kazanka region and captured the Russian general serving here made a big noise on the world agenda. Russian liberation fighters who have been fighting against Russian forces in Ukrainian territory for a long time are waging a great struggle to end the Russian occupation and Putin's regime. Founded from soldiers who fled the Soviet's army in the Second World War, this union has been continuing its activities for many years. These pro-Ukrainian soldiers entered Russian territory with the operation launched in recent days and carried out 3 different operations in the city of Belgorod. Pro-Ukrainian soldiers who launched an offensive in the areas where the Russian army was concentrated first entered the Gravarin region of Belgorod. After hours of clashes, it was announced that the area was completely cleared of Russian soldiers and under the control of the Russian Liberation Army. At the same time, the governor of Belgorod, Vyacheslav Gladkov, made a statement saying that the Ukrainian army troops had captured the Gravarin settlement within the borders of Russia and that all Russian troops there had withdrawn. Sputnik news agency, on the other hand, reported that pro-Ukrainian troops continued their airstrikes against the town of Glovo and 2 Russian soldiers were killed. Meanwhile, the Russian Liberation Army soldiers wasted no time and launched a military operation in the Kosenko region known as the Coordination Center of Russian Troops in Belgorod. Pro-Ukrainian soldiers who entered the borders of Kazanka took action to seize a large Russian headquarters there. The pro-Ukrainian soldiers who completely surrounded the headquarters managed to successfully capture the Russian headquarters in Kosenko region after hours of clashes. While most of the Russian soldiers inside the headquarters managed to escape, it was stated that many Russian soldiers were neutralized. However, hours later, a statement came from the commander of the Russian Liberation Army that drove Vladimir Putin crazy. It was announced by the commander of the pro-Ukrainian troops that the Russian general who served as the Russian army commander in Belgorod was serving in this headquarters and that the Russian general was arrested and taken prisoner after the headquarters was captured. According to the statements made on the Telegram channels of the Russian Liberation Army, 22 Russian soldiers and 1 senior Russian general in the headquarters have been captured. It is said that after the pro-Ukrainian soldiers captured the Russian general, the general was transferred to Ukrainian territory and continues to be held captive in a Ukrainian headquarters there. With the news that the Russian general was taken prisoner, there was a major crisis in the Kremlin palace. According to information obtained from sources close to the Kremlin, Russian leader Vladimir Putin summoned General Valery Gerasimov, the commander of the Russian army, and Sergei Naryshkin, the head of the Russian intelligence service. Immediately after this incident, according to the information obtained, the Russian leader blamed Sergei Naryshkin for the fact that the soldiers of the Russian Liberation Army so easily entered the Russian borders and organized such an operation. Putin, who has recently been very tense due to the successive operations organized by the Ukrainian army, continues to blame those around him for these failures. The city of Belgorod on Russia's border with Ukraine is of great importance for Vladimir Putin and Russian military. Most of the ammunition and weapons sent to Russian troops in Ukrainian territory are sent to Ukrainian territory via Belgorod. The Ukrainian army, which wants to break the power of the Russian army on Ukrainian territory, has been organizing operations to prevent these military shipments of the Russian army for a long time. The Russian Liberation Army, which operates in Russia but is opposed to Vladimir Putin and the Russian army and has been cooperating with the Ukrainian army for a long time, has organized a similar operation within Russian borders by varying Russian military uniforms. The Russian Liberation Army soldiers who managed to infiltrate the Russian headquarters in the Zaporizhia region with the same strategy before managed to capture the Russian corridors with a great strategy. The pro-Ukrainian Russian soldiers who managed to capture 72 Russian soldiers in the headquarters and neutralized 18 Russian soldiers dropped like a bomb on the world agenda. The Zaporizhia region, which was occupied by the Russian army in the first month of the war, was a very important region for Putin because it was home to Europe's largest nuclear power plant. For this reason, Vladimir Putin organized a referendum with an illegal annexation decision shortly after occupying this region. Putin's main goal was to transfer the entire management of the nuclear facility to Russia. Putin dismissed all Ukrainian engineers from the plant and replaced them with Russian engineers. The first blow to Putin, who thought that he had completely dominated the Zaporizhia region, came from the soldiers of the Russian Liberation Army. Thanks to the operation organized by this pro-Ukrainian soldiers, the Russian headquarters was captured. Thus, the first blow was struck to Vladimir Putin when Russian leader Vladimir Putin realized that he could not continue his occupation of Ukrainian territory only with the Russian army. He started to ask for support from his allies. Putin, who first enlisted the support of the Wagner mercenary company Yevgeny Prigozhin, bought a large number of mercenaries and sent them to fight on Ukrainian soil. Not only that, Putin has also sent prisoners from Russian prisons to Ukraine through the Wagner company in exchange for their freedom and has been making Russian prisoners fight in Ukraine. Another ally of Vladimir Putin was Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov. Ramzan Kadyrov, who declared that he would support Russia in the first months of the war, was providing military support to the Russian army. However, when Putin realized that he was losing the war in Ukraine, he started to ask for more support from Ramzan Kadyrov. Thus, tens of thousands of Chechen soldiers were sent to fight in Ukraine on Ramzan Kadyrov orders. However, the vast majority of the Chechen soldiers sent did not want to fight for Vladimir Putin. As a result, there was great unrest within the Russian troops on the territory of Ukraine. These disturbances, which started with the disagreements between Wagner soldiers and Chechen soldiers, led to many revolts within the army. Chechen commanders who were uncomfortable with the racist approach of Wagner soldiers treating Chechen soldiers as second-class people had many arguments with Wagner commanders. As it is known, Chechen soldiers and Wagner soldiers are stationed in the same headquarters. According to the claims of Chechen soldiers, the basic necessities such as ammunition, rations, and medicines sent by the Russian government to these headquarters were not given to Chechen soldiers. Chechen soldiers who stated that even most of the most important supplies were given to Wagner soldiers stated that they are trying to survive with one meal a day. Chechen soldiers who reacted to the situation decided to lay down their arms many times and protested against Vladimir Putin. However, due to the economic difficulties Russia is currently experiencing, not enough supplies can be sent to Russian troops in Ukrainian territory. The biggest news comes from the southern front. Ukrainians continue to release in footage of the total liberation of new settlements. Today, Ukrainian 35th Marine Brigade posted a video of clearing the houses and raising the Ukrainian flag above Storozavoy. This is the village that Russians previously tried to preserve control of and even launch mechanized counterattacks. The Marines also showed one of such counterattacks, and judging by the footage, Russians used several squads of infantry reinforced with 1 tank and 3 armored fighting vehicles. Since the Ukrainians were in control of the tactical heights, the counterattack was quickly rebuffed and the whole assault unit was eliminated. The moment the driver of the last BMP realized that they were done, He launched in the opposite direction so fast that one Russian soldier fell off the vehicle. It turned out that he was lucky because Ukrainians took him captive while the vehicle that he fell off of exploded on a mine. Today, Ukrainian Defense Deputy Minister also confirmed yesterday's claims and speculations and verified that Ukrainians successfully pushed the Russians from Lavagna and gained an important foothold on the next ridge of tactical heights. If you look at the topographic map, we can see that from Lavagna, Ukrainians can conveniently continue slicing off Russian defenses. If you still remember yesterday, I told you that the fall of Lavagna means that the Russian defense in overdrive Katerynople will automatically collapse due to the threat of encirclement. And this is exactly what happened today. After seeing that the escape window was closing at an unprecedented rate, Russian forces wasted no time and retreated from Novogorodievka. Ukrainian forces have already entered Russian fortifications in and around the settlement, and as Russian intelligence reported, Ukrainians are demining the fields between this settlement and Novosel and overall preparing the roads for easy and stable supplies. The further development of the counter-offensive operation. Some Russian sources reported that Russian forces launched a powerful counterattack in the direction of Makarivka and are about to return everything that they lost. However, it looks like just a supporting attack that tries to protect the flanks of the retreating forces from Rivnoapil, because some Russian sources already started mentioning that the village is in the gray zone. Yesterday I told you that the fact that Russians blew up the dam highly likely means that they abandoned Dorogeny because otherwise they would doom their own forces by cutting them off with the flooding. Today, some sources started to confirm that Ukrainians established full control over this settlement and started developing their attack further in order to complicate Ukrainian advances even more. Today, Russian forces blew up the second dam on this river, which means that Ukrainians will not be able to assault Russian settlements from the east. This saves the Russian defense from the immediate and uncontrollable collapse because right now Russian forces at least manage to organize a coherent retreat when it comes to the eastern part of the region. The fights around Novodonetsk continue too. The Ukrainian 1st Tank Brigade released a video of how they are destroying Russian fortifications in the 3 lanes west of the settlement and widening the bridgehead. It is expected that very soon Ukrainians will also launch an attack on Kremenchuk as they're already on the approach to this settlement. In the meantime, Ukrainian Air Force continues conducting precision strikes on Russian military bases and command posts. One of the biggest strikes happened in Henichsk, which was previously considered one of the safest part of the Kherson region, which is why it gradually became the occupational administrative center. Ukrainian sources reported that they struck one of the biggest Russian headquarters in the south. Ukrainians also continue conducting hammer strikes on Melitopol, Tokmak, and Molochna. Russian sources confirmed that in the aftermath of one of these strikes, Ukrainians have destroyed the headquarters of the highest level of command and eliminated the commander of the 35th Russian Army, Major General Goryachev. It was reported that this time almost all Russian journals were deployed to the Zaporizhia direction to be in touch with what is happening on the front and prevent another catastrophe. Even the chief of the Russian General Staff Gerasimov is reportedly somewhere in Zaporizhia. So Ukrainian intelligence and Air Force are currently on a big hunt.